What would happen if I told you that, despite qualifying 7th, Hamilton could be the great candidate to win in Monaco? Something in his classification data has made the alarms jump, and Ferrari knows it. Hard classification data do not usually hide surprises. A time, a position, a penalty. But when we observed with magnifying glass what happened with Lewis Hamilton on Saturday in Monaco 2025, that superficial story becomes a true strategic puzzle. Hamilton marked a 1:10,382, enough to get into the second row, a solid result if the tortuous process of adaptation to Ferrari SF25 is considered. But what at first glance seemed a session without major shocks ended up revealing a story that can change the course of his season. The penalty for obstructing Verstappen pushed him to the 7th place on the grid. And yet the deep analysis of that time and its technical context suggests that Hamilton was in one of the best moments since he arrived in Maranello. First, you have to understand the symbolic and technical weight of Monaco. It is not just another track on the calendar. It is the final precision, trust, and tuning exam. It is a track that rewards the pilot with greater sensitivity and punishes any car that does not have millimeter balance between aerodynamic load and traction. It is in this context where Ferrari made a seemingly contradictory but bold decision: to go back in time and mount on the SF25 a rear wing of the SF24, the same that led Leclerc to the total domain in 2024 in the same circuit. A piece that represents more than a technical solution. It is a declaration of principles, a tacit confession that his current concept was not giving results on high-load tracks such as Monaco. But this was not a simple improvisation. Behind there were weeks of simulator work, covert tests, data analysis, and not any type of analysis. The key was to understand where Hamilton lost and won time, not in the lines or on the braking, but at the most delicate moment of all Monaco, the traction and curve output. In sectors such as Rascasse and Portier, where the pilot steps on the accelerator with the direction still closed, any imperfection in the rear suspension translates into survival, in loss of traction, intents that escape without remedy. This is where Ferrari refined his new rear suspension, adapted millimetrically to the demands of Hamilton, a pilot who bases much of his style on that critical moment of power application. The most fascinating thing is that these modifications not only sought pure performance, they were also a commitment to trust. Hamilton had declared to feel disconnected from the rear axle of the car in the first major awards, and Ferrari knew it. Hence, they even decided to implement the new rear brake ducts, a piece originally designed for Icola with the intention of stabilizing the posterior axle and avoiding return fluctuations. Every detail was aimed at giving Hamilton what he needed to be himself, to attack Monaco's walls with that mixture of aggressiveness and control that has made it shine in this circuit in the past. The really revealing thing is that, despite the end of the penalty, Hamilton's classification time was achieved with a less aggressive configuration than his partner Leclerc. Ferrari had divided his approach between the two cars, exploring different configurations such as test days. And the data showed that Hamilton, even with a less extreme package, had better sectors than Charles. What would have happened if it had not been sanctioned? What would have happened if Ferrari had overturned all its resources behind that configuration? The truth is that in that 1:10,382 there is a story of silent redemption. Hamilton is not only beginning to understand the Ferrari, he is beginning to mold him to his liking. And Monaco could be the perfect setting for this evolution to translate, finally, in results. Lewis Hamilton's accident in the third free practice could be interpreted as a simple piloting error, a distraction, or excessive confidence in one of the most treacherous areas of the Monaco circuit. But reduce it to that would be to ignore the layers of meaning that this incident exposed. Because in reality, the accident in the casino area was the most visible symptom of a technical experiment taken to the limit. Ferrari had designed the weekend around a strategic duality: find the optimal balance between slow curve and stability under traction. And for Hamilton, that meant risk, try the most extreme, explore configurations that had not yet been validated in real conditions. What left us was not just a damaged body. It was a clear track of how far Ferrari was willing to push his SF25. In the turns before the accident, Hamilton was registering partials that placed him as the second fastest in the second sector, behind only Norris. And that sector, which includes curves like Mirabeau, Portier, and the entrance to the tunnel, is precisely where a well-balanced car differs from the rest. Telemetry showed something even more relevant. The SF25 with the Hamilton configuration was generating more lateral stability than that of Leclerc, especially at the time of reapplying power. This data is not less. In Monaco, where the slightest slip is paid against the wall, the possibility of accelerating earlier and with less correction in the steering wheel is a strategic advantage of gigantic proportions. But the most revolutionary was the complete set that Ferrari mounted for him. Unlike standard configurations, the Hamilton package included a revised version of the rear diffuser, small modifications in suspension geometry, and a brake setup inherited directly from Icola tests. This last component, the new cooling ducts, was key to stabilize the rear axle temperatures and therefore the pressure of the tires. This significantly reduced the traction micro-oscillation that Hamilton had suffered in Australia and China. In other words, the car was no longer a box of surprises when accelerating. Now it responded with predictability and consistency, two essential attributes for a circuit such as Monaco. The career simulations made in training were also revealing. Although they are not officially advertised, the internal records that leaked from the paddock suggest that Hamilton's rhythm in long simulations was only 2/10 of the best Verstappen's stint in similar conditions. And most importantly, with less degradation in the last laps. This means that SF25 had not only improved in the peak of performance, but also in consistency. In a circuit to advance is practically impossible, that consistency allows you to play with the strategy, apply pressure, force errors, or even execute an undercut without taking unnecessary risks on the track. This improvement was also reflected in the impressions of Hamilton himself. For the first time since Ferrari joined, he spoke clearly about pure feeling with the car. There were no evening criticism or mentions in the absence of trust, or references to technical limits. Its body language, its precision at the wheel during Q1 and Q2, and the way it addressed curves such as the fork of the Lowe's or the chicane of the Port, evidenced a reconnection between pilot and machine. That tune, almost symbiotic, is the one that transforms a good car into a real threat to victory. And in Monaco, that threat takes on a different dimension. It means that each return can be a planned attack, a surgical attempt to gain time where the rest only tries to survive. In summary, the SF25 showed in Monaco its most polished form so far. A car that seemed convicted of an unstable aerodynamic concept found in the personalized touch-ups for Hamilton a second life. It was not simply a technical evolution. It was a redefinition of the approach, a change of philosophy in full season. And when a Ferrari-caliber team makes such a daring decision with one of the most laureate pilots in history at the wheel, they know they have something in hand. Something that can win. The phrase, "leaving 7th in Monaco" is a sentence has been repeated both in the history of Formula One that has acquired an almost dogmatic air. But the truth is that the reality of the most technical and demanding grand prize of the calendar is much more nuanced. Yes, advancing is complicated. Yes, the track is narrow and the errors are paid with dropouts. But it is also true that Monaco has been the scene of some of the brightest strategies, of unexpected comebacks and deeds where talent and tactics have erased the disadvantages of the grille. And it is precisely in that scenario where Lewis Hamilton is located for this 2025 edition. 7th at the exit, yes, but with a series of cards in the hand that could convert that starting point into the springboard towards victory. To understand why it is not unreasonable to think of a victory from that position, you have to dissect the behavior of the SF25 in career conditions. Monaco degradation is traditionally low, which eliminates one of the factors that has most penalized Ferrari in abrasive circuits. This means that the pure rhythm has a greater relevance, and that is where the work of setup and the improvements introduced by Ferrari for Hamilton gain weight. The improvement in traction, the thermal stabilization of the rear axle, and the increasing confidence of the pilot allow to plan long stints without loss of significant performance. In strategic terms, this opens the door to the undercut, especially if Ferrari manages to accurately tame the moment when cars are forced to stop. But there are more. The layout of the Monaco circuit rewards anticipation. It is not simply a matter of speed, but to execute each maneuver, each input to boxes, each curve output with a Suizo watch precision. And Hamilton, even in his first year with Ferrari, is still one of the most consistent pilots under pressure. To this is added the traffic factor, often undervalued. From the 7th position, it is very possible that Hamilton looks trapped behind pilots slower than him in real career rhythm, but that is not necessarily a conviction. In fact, you can play in your favor if you manage to stay within the DRS activation range and strength to rival strategists to react prematurely. A poorly calculated reaction of equipment such as McLaren or Red Bull could open a window that Ferrari is ready to take advantage of. And then there is the weather. Although the forecasts have not confirmed rain, the threat is always latent in the microclimate of the Principality. A light drizzle could turn a control race into a roulette of opportunities. Under these conditions, experience, track reading, and real-time adaptation ability become more important than the output order. Hamilton, with more than 300 large awards and multiple victories in rain, is a specialist in converting chaos into glory. He already did it in Hockenheim, in Silverstone, in Istanbul. And in Monaco, where wet asphalt converts traction into a more precious good than ever, its personalized SF25 configuration could be the difference between staying on track or kissing the wall. In addition, we cannot ignore the psychological factor. Hamilton has given clear signs of a rejuvenated mentality. After years of frustration in Mercedes, his arrival in Ferrari has lit a spark. It is not just the motivation of a new challenge. It is the opportunity to close his legacy in the most emblematic team of Formula One. Winning in Monaco with Ferrari would be more than a victory. It would be a declaration of intentions, a message for their rivals, for their team, and for the millions of fans who have accompanied him at each stage. It is an opportunity that, although it seems unlikely from paper, becomes increasingly real when all variables are considered. What we just analyzed is not simply one more episode in the trajectory of Lewis Hamilton or one more weekend within the long season 2025. It is the opening of a new chapter that raises fundamental questions not only for Ferrari, but for the entire Formula One. What we saw in the Monaco classification was not a coincidence or accident. It was the result of a transformation process that goes beyond the technique. It is an identity reconstruction between pilot and equipment. Hamilton is not simply adapting to Ferrari. He is molding Ferrari from within, redirecting an engineering philosophy that for years had been lost between strategic errors and unstable aerodynamic concepts. And the fact that this occurs precisely in Monaco, the most symbolic and demanding circuit of the championship, only amplifies its relevance. It would not be the first time that a team finds its turning point at the least expected time. And if Hamilton has demonstrated throughout his career, it is that the challenges are his fuel. Every time he has been questioned, every time he has been underestimated, he has responded with actions that redefine what we thought were possible. Why would this weekend be different? Leave me your opinion in the comments. What reading do you make of this classification? What strategy would you run if you were on the Ferrari wall? And above all, do not forget to subscribe to follow the thread of this season, that career to career.